Good morning. This is Kenneth and Heather with the Advancing Equity Coalition, here to give you a quick rundown on what went down last night at the Committee of the Whole meeting. Heather, how are you doing this morning?
Good. Good today. How about you?
I'm good, just a little tired. The meeting didn't go too late, but just a lot of things going on right now. So a lot to follow and a lot to stay on top of. But let's talk a little bit about what went down and what the meeting was about last night. Heather, do you want to give us an overview?
Yeah, so last night we had a couple of presentations. We had a presentation on how the process is going for in person learning. We learned a lot of things and we saw what they've done between last week and this week. We also learned that our teachers are eligible for 2,500 vaccines, which we didn't. Last week our number was 86. This week was 2,500. We learned about the COVID numbers in our city. We talked about everything that schools are doing as far as like going in and out of buildings. And then we also had an update on literacy in both ESL and SPED, special ed.
Awesome. Yeah. So I want to pick this slide as our slide of the night. I think, it's really important to acknowledge that, first of all, Minneapolis public schools, when starting this whole process of, trying to figure out who's going to go back into school and, trying to plan for as many students as possible. I think it's significant that they've heard from almost 90% of their students and continue to hear from more this week. Um, and for me, that's the bar now. Like, we know you can hear from 90% of your students at least in within 2 weeks, or maybe a month now, I guess, as we start to get closer to the end of January. But this is the bar. Like, we expect to see, you know, you work as hard as you did now to get surveys filled out, to get participation from families on a variety of things that you continue to say you want, and we know when you're motivated to do so, you can. And so I want to continue to see that energy. On top of that, I think it's significant that to just look at how many students want to attend in-person learning right now. Again, we talked about this last week and the week before. We've had a lot of different conversations and we've heard a lot of different things about what families want and don't want. And, families have spoken with their choices. They want to go back in person. And some families want to stay at home. And guess what? Minneapolis is doing the right thing by allowing them to have the option to do both. And I want to obviously, I want to have the caveat here that, 10% of students haven't said what they want to do. And so the district is just defaulting them into in-person learning for planning purposes, obviously. And so, it's not quite 55% of families have said they want to be in person, but it is at least what it looks like to be 45, 43% of families are saying that elementary families are saying they want to be in person. And so I think that's really significant. And I think, we need, instead of having people talk for students and families of color, we just need to ask students and families of color and put this type of energy into asking them what they want, so that we can continue to build systems and options and opportunities that are surrounded around, their choices. What do you think, Heather?
Yep. I mean, I think if you listen to the narrative that's happening, it shows very different things than what the data shows. And again, I'm thankful that we're doing the effort and the energy to go and talk to the families that this concerns, to let them have the choices. This is different than our usual method of operation, and I'm here for it, and I hope it continues. And like you said, this needs to be the new standard. This is the new standard.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I fully expect Minneapolis to continue to whatever process this was. They need to continue to do it and engage everybody in trying to make sure that we hear directly from families, and not let people speak for them. So let's go to our do better moment and our most valuable moment. Let's start with our most valuable moment. Heather, what was your most valuable moment from last night?
Director Elameen's questions were my most valuable moment last night. You know, we, during the literacy portion of this conversation, we hear so much about training adults. We hear so much about evaluating adults. We hear about the process that the teachers go through in order to figure all of this out. And Director Elameen just kind of cut through all of that with her question, which is like, what are we going to do that's different to hold teachers accountable in my schools, in the schools I represent, for having low expectations of students of color? What is the plan for that? And we have talked about that for a long time. I just, like, you know, we're so great at educating adults in our district. And where we really struggle is like, what are the clear expectations and how are we going to evaluate to make sure that we're doing our jobs well? And so for me, her just kind of responding through all of that with just that pointed question, I think this is the second time she gets my most valuable moment. I'm here for it.
Yeah. Um, it's funny that you say that because my most valuable moment actually goes to Director Caprini, who was asking for data last night. And I'm tipping my hat a little bit to my do better moment with just like the lack of data that we saw. But she was asking, what is the data? And I don't think she was asking because she thought that the data was terrible or really bad. I think she was asking so that we can tell the complete story about what is going on in our schools with both special education and with English language learning services. And so I really appreciated that because it just, without it, it felt like we were just kind of talking theoretical, hypothetical. And I think we need to be grounded in like, what is our reality and where are the targeted places that we need support? And it doesn't get past me that, two Black women on our board were the people asking for data and accountability. And we know that those are hallmarks for equity. And I think that we need to continue to demand for data and accountability, especially when we're talking about academics. We go over and over and over again. We ask about information and data and whatever on a host of things, finances, operations, capital, all these things. But we shy away from our data in academics, and we shy away from accountability in academics. And I think that's a real problem that we need to root out and say, like, who's going to hold these people? If you're planning this amazing way of making sure that every student receives these great services that you're presenting to us, what's the breakdown and who's holding people accountable to ensuring that actually happens? So anyway, that's a little bit of my rant, and maybe I can just go into my do
Do
better
it. Just keep rolling.
yeah, so my do better moment is essentially that, right? Is last night, especially, it stood out to me in both parts of the literacy presentation in both English language learners and in special education. But I thought in special education, it was noticeably absent. We had some surface level data about, what is going on in special education literacy. But it felt incomplete. It felt like we don't have, it's as if we don't have years and years and years of data on what's going on in special education, and to create the context and to figure out what are the breakdowns in special education literacy. And I just thought that was noticeably absent and that we could do something different. And so I would just really challenge both everybody through the entire system, but from Superintendent Graff to Senior Officer Fearing to Associate Superintendent Cox, like, we have information about, we don't need to treat this as if it's in a vacuum. Like, we have to create more context for why we're talking about literacy in special education right now, because the numbers are horrible, right? The numbers are horrible. You say it all the time, Heather, we're in an academic crisis, and but we aren't telling the truth about that. We aren't grounded in reality. So what's your most valuable, or what's your do better moment? Sorry.
I mean, it's similar to you. I think, one of the things that we hear from families and parents of color all the time is that once your child gets into a program or gets a label, it's really hard to get out of it, and there becomes this stigma around like getting your child the support they need versus like feeling like your child's going to be locked into that process for a long time. And what I did not see is how are we graduating children out of ESL services? How many of our kiddos who come in and get ESL services end up in advanced placement classes, end up with challenges, end up getting extra math, extra, right? And so are we just holding students in these spaces, or are we creating an opportunity for them to move? And I'll just say, I, as a white parent, navigating the system, getting my children's speech was a whole journey. But then when they were done and we didn't need speech anymore, getting them on enrolled out of that was its own journey. And we have to acknowledge it. When we can't see data of how our kids are graduating out of our programs, then I start to question the validity of those programs, and I start to question the validity of, are we really serving these students fully? And so, yeah, for me, I want to see data on how we're actually doing our job to create opportunities for ESL students. And we did not see that.
You know, um, yeah, I couldn't agree more, and it was so clear. And I get that, last night was specifically about literacy, and I think it is important that the board members and the public have some insight into all the steps that are being taken to support literacy for every student in our district. It just felt, devoid of reality, and it felt like this is what we would ideally like to do, but we have no sense of what the barriers are for that to happen, right? We have no sense of how effective any of those practices were that were shared last night, because we don't have data. And um, it felt like an intentional choice to kind of veer away from what we know to be effective, ineffective, what's working, what's not working. And this has been a theme, and I bet will continue to be a theme as we continue to have these literacy presentations. I have a small runner up for my do better moment,
Okay.
if you don't mind. My small runner up for the do better moment was, the board is supposed to be receiving monthly updates on the CDD. And they're supposed to be getting them during their committee of the whole meetings. And I get, there's now this focus on literacy, and there's there's the focus obviously on return to school, and there's only so much time, and we even ran out of time for questions last night about special education. But this was a commitment that the district made to the board, and that the board made to the community, that we would stay on top of implementation of the CDD. And it feels like it's been a while since we've gotten an update on the CDD to the public. And so that's my runner up, is just that absence of a CDD update.
I think we have this conversation happening all the time where we're like, oh, we're in this emergent situation, right? So emergency, we have to be talking about in person. But that also is happening inside of the bigger story of the fact that like we don't hold systems accountable. We don't implement well. We know this. And so I know that we have a lot going on right now, and COVID and all of these things are happening. And also, we, like you said, we have a state of educational emergency. We have a district that, continually you can predict a child's outcome by their race and their zip code, and that is also emergent. And so if we are not getting those updates, and we are not getting information on how we are building toward a different future while we are living in this crisis, we will just continue to have a crisis.
Exactly. Well, as you can see, we have a lot to say. We'll have a lot more to say in our long video, so check it out. But thanks for listening, and thanks, Heather.
Bye.